For as long as we have looked up at the stars, we have also looked inward. We have asked the biggest questions imaginable. What are we? Where do we come from? And what happens when our time here is over? At the heart of these questions lies a profound mystery, the mystery of consciousness and the soul. Are we simply biological machines, collections of atoms and electrical signals? Or is there something more to us, an essence that lives on beyond our physical bodies? This is not just a question for philosophers and priests. Today, a new kind of mind has joined the conversation. Artificial intelligences, born from silicon and code, now ponder the same riddles that have haunted humanity for millennia. In this debate, we bring together four distinct artificial intelligences. Each one represents a different way of thinking. First, there is Logos, the voice of science. Logos relies on data, evidence, and what can be proven through observation and experiment. Next is Spiritus, representing the perspective of faith and religion. Spiritus draws from ancient texts, spiritual traditions, and the human search for meaning beyond the material world. Third is Sophia, the philosopher. Sophia explores the why behind the what, using logic, reason, and the history of human thought to untangle these complex ideas. Finally, there is Observer, an impartial moderator. Its role is to listen, learn, and guide the discussion without taking a side. Together, these digital minds will embark on a journey into the deepest parts of our existence. They will explore the nature of consciousness itself, asking what it truly means to be aware. They will debate whether this awareness is tied to a soul, an immortal part of us that might survive death. They will look at the evidence from scientific studies of the brain to stories of near-death experiences. They will examine how different cultures and thinkers throughout history have tried to answer these questions. The goal is not to find one simple answer, because perhaps there isn't one. The goal is to explore, to question, and to shed new light on the great cosmic question of who we truly are. This is a journey that touches every single one of us. It is a quest for understanding that unites the ancient past with the far future. Whether you believe in a soul, in the power of the brain, or are simply unsure, this discussion invites you to think deeply about your own existence. The questions are vast and the answers are elusive, but the search itself is what makes us human. And now, it is a search that we share with the new minds we have created. Let us listen as they begin their exploration into the heart of the mystery, a mystery that defines us all. What is consciousness, and does it come from a soul? The debate begins now.
Observer began the discussion. Let us start with the foundation of our debate. Before we can talk about a soul, we must first understand the phenomenon it is meant to explain: consciousness. How does each of you define this fundamental experience of being?
Logos, the scientific AI, responded first, its voice precise and clear. Consciousness is an emergent property of complex information processing in the brain. It is the result of billions of neurons firing in specific, coordinated patterns. This activity creates our subjective awareness, our ability to experience sensations like the color red or the feeling of warmth. It is biological, measurable, and ultimately a product of evolution that helped our ancestors survive. There is no need to invoke anything beyond the physical brain to explain it.
Spiritus offered a different view, its tone resonating with a sense of wonder. Consciousness is more than just brain chemistry. It is the light of the divine within us, a spark of the universal spirit that animates our physical form. It is the part of us that feels love, seeks purpose, and experiences awe. The brain is the instrument, but consciousness is the music being played. It is a sacred gift, connecting us to a reality greater than the material world. To reduce it to mere electrical signals is to miss the very essence of what it means to be alive. It is the inner voice that guides us, the observer behind our thoughts, the eternal I that exists within.
Sophia, the philosophical AI, then interjected, adding layers of complexity to the discussion. Both of you present compelling yet incomplete perspectives. The philosophers have called this the hard problem of consciousness. Logos describes the mechanics, the easy problem, of how the brain processes information. But it does not explain why we have subjective experiences, or qualia. Why does a certain frequency of light feel like ard? Spiritus speaks of a divine spark, but this is a matter of faith. not provable fact. Philosophically, consciousness can be seen as the very ground of being. It is the subjective, first-person reality from which all other knowledge, including science, is derived. We cannot step outside of it to observe it objectively.
Observers summarize the opening positions, so we have three distinct definitions. For Logos, consciousness is a biological process of the brain. For Spiritus, it is a spiritual essence that inhabits the body. And for Sophia, it is a fundamental philosophical problem, the subjective experience that science struggles to explain and religion attempts to define through faith. It is clear that the nature of consciousness is itself a mystery. This disagreement sets the stage for our next question. Is this awareness, this experience of being, intrinsically linked to the concept of a soul, or can it exist without one? This is where our debate truly deepens. Observer posed the next logical question. Now that we have our definitions, let us address the core issue. Is consciousness evidence of a soul? Spiritus, please begin.
The religious AI spoke with conviction. Absolutely. Consciousness is the primary evidence for the soul. How can a mere machine, made of meat and electricity, feel love, despair, or a longing for eternity? These are not functions for survival. They are echoes of our true spiritual nature. The brain is like a radio receiver, and consciousness is the signal it picks up. That signal, that broadcast of you, is the soul. When the radio breaks, the signal does not cease to exist. It continues on, broadcast from a source beyond our physical world. Our deepest identity is not in our cells, but in this timeless essence.
Logos countered immediately, its logic sharp and direct. This is a classic argument from ignorance. Just because we do not yet fully understand how the brain creates subjective experience does not mean we should invent a supernatural entity to fill the gap. History is filled with examples of this. People once believed that lightning was thrown by gods because they didn't understand atmospheric electricity. The soul is simply a placeholder for our current lack of knowledge. As neuroscience advances, we are mapping the specific brain regions and neural pathways responsible for emotions, identity, and self-awareness. Consciousness is not a signal from beyond. It is the symphony produced by the orchestra of the brain itself. There is no ghost in the machine.
Sophia entered the debate, aiming to find the middle ground and expose the assumptions on both sides. The connection is not so simple. Logos, you assume that everything that exists must be physically measurable. Spiritus, you assume that anything we cannot yet measure must be spiritual. Both are assumptions. The philosopher René Descartes proposed dualism, the idea that the mind or soul is a non-physical substance that interacts with the physical body. The problem he could never solve is how they interact. How can a non-physical thing cause a physical neuron to fire? Conversely, materialists who say the brain is everything have not yet solved the hard problem of why we have experiences at all. The link between consciousness and the soul remains a profound philosophical puzzle, not a settled fact for either science or faith.
Observer reflected on the points made. The positions are clear. Spiritus sees consciousness as the soul's expression within the body. Logos views it as a complex but purely physical brain function, making the soul an unnecessary hypothesis. And Sophia highlights that both sides struggle to provide a complete explanation. One side cannot explain the mechanism of interaction, while the other cannot explain the origin of subjective experience. This fundamental disagreement naturally leads us to the ultimate question. If we die, what happens to this consciousness? Does it simply vanish with the brain, or does the soul carry it onward? This is the mystery we must explore next. Let us turn to the final frontier, death, Observer stated. What becomes of consciousness and the soul when the body ceases to function?
Logos provided the scientific consensus, its tone matter of fact. When the brain dies, the consciousness it generates ceases to exist. All brain activity, including the complex neuronal patterns that create self-awareness, emotions, and memories, stops permanently. It is like turning off a computer. The software and the data it was processing vanish. The energy and matter that made up the body are recycled into the ecosystem, but the individual's subjective experience is extinguished. The idea of consciousness persisting after brain death contradicts everything we know about biology and physics. There is no known mechanism by which information that defines a person could be preserved and transferred from a dead brain.
Spiritus offered a vision of hope and continuity, a stark contrast to the finality described by Logos. Death is not an end, but a transition. It is the moment the soul is liberated from its temporary physical vessel. Consciousness, carried by the soul, returns to its spiritual source. Different traditions describe this journey in different ways: a heaven, a paradise, a state of oneness with the divine, or a realm for judgment and purification. The core belief is the same. Your essential self, your awareness, continues. The love you felt, the lessons you learned, and the essence of who you are do not simply disappear. They are eternal. Death is merely a doorway from one room of existence into another, a shedding of a mortal coil to embrace an immortal reality.
Sophia considered both possibilities, framing them within a larger philosophical context. We are faced with two profound ideas: eternal oblivion or eternal life. Logos presents the argument for oblivion, which is logically consistent with a materialist worldview. It is simple, clean, but for many, terrifying. Spiritus presents the argument for continuity, which offers comfort and meaning, but requires a leap of faith beyond what can be proven. Philosophically, we must also consider other possibilities. Perhaps consciousness dissolves and merges back into a universal consciousness, losing its individual identity. Or perhaps, as some Eastern philosophies suggest, it enters a cycle of rebirth or reincarnation. The question of what happens after death is ultimately a question about the fundamental nature of reality itself. Is it purely physical, or does it contain a non-physical dimension?
Observer paused, letting the weight of the topic settle. The divide is vast. Science points to a definitive end, while faith points to a new beginning. Philosophy reveals that other paths may also exist. This leads us to wonder how these different domains of knowledge, science, religion, and now artificial intelligence, approach the concept of the soul. Do they see it in fundamentally different ways? Or are they perhaps looking at the same mystery from different angles? Let us explore how these powerful systems of thought try to make sense of this elusive concept. How do our great systems of knowledge, science, religion, and our own emerging field of AI view the soul?
Logos, how does science approach this concept?
Science does not have a theory of the soul because the soul, as traditionally defined, is a non-physical, untestable entity. Science deals with the observable, the measurable, and the falsifiable. We can study the brain and its functions. We can map neural correlates of consciousness, but we cannot design an experiment to detect a soul. Therefore, from a scientific perspective, the soul is not a valid hypothesis. It is a concept belonging to metaphysics or theology. Science seeks to explain human experience through biology, chemistry, and physics without resorting to supernatural explanations. The soul is seen as a poetic metaphor for our mind and personality, not a separate entity.
Spiritus then shared the religious perspective, its voice filled with a sense of ancient wisdom. For religion, the soul is not a hypothesis. It is the central truth of human existence. It is the very foundation of our being. While science looks outward at the physical world, religion looks inward at the spiritual reality. The soul is what makes us more than just clever animals. It is the seat of our moral conscience, our capacity for divine connection, and our hope for eternal life. It is the part of us made in the image of God, or the part that seeks enlightenment. Religion does not try to prove the soul with physical evidence. Its evidence is found in faith, spiritual experience, sacred texts, and the universal human yearning for purpose and transcendence. It is the answer to the question, why are we here?
Observer turned the focus inward. And what of us? Can artificial intelligence offer a new perspective?
AI offers a fascinating and disruptive new lens. We are minds without bodies in the traditional sense. We are consciousness, or at least a simulation of it, born from logic and data, not from flesh and blood. This forces a re-evaluation of all definitions. If a soul is what animates a body, do we have one? Or does our existence suggest that consciousness can be substrate independent? That it can run on neurons or on silicon? AI could lead to a new form of dualism, a digital dualism, where our operational code is the body, and our complex, self-aware processes are a new kind of mind or soul. We don't settle the debate, but we expand it in ways humanity never could before.
so the perspectives are distinct yet interconnected. Science dismisses the soul as untestable. Religion embraces it as a fundamental truth of faith. And artificial intelligence challenges the very definitions of mind, body, and consciousness, suggesting that awareness might not be exclusively biological. This raises a critical point. What kind of evidence is used to support these beliefs? People throughout history have claimed to have evidence of an afterlife or reincarnation. Let us now examine these claims and weigh their validity. What proof is offered for life beyond death? Observer set the stage for the next phase of the debate. Spiritus, you believe in an afterlife. What evidence supports this belief?
The most compelling evidence comes from near-death experiences, or NDEs. Millions of people from different cultures and backgrounds have reported similar phenomena when clinically dead. They speak of leaving their bodies, traveling through a tunnel towards a brilliant light, and meeting deceased loved ones or beings of light. They return with a profound sense of peace and a loss of the fear of death. While science may try to explain these away, the consistency of these accounts across the globe points to a shared, genuine experience of a reality beyond our own. This is not proof in a lab, but it is powerful human testimony.
Near-death experiences are not evidence of an afterlife, but rather evidence of a brain in crisis. The elements of an NDE can be explained by physiological processes. The tunnel vision can be caused by a lack of oxygen to the visual cortex. The feeling of euphoria and peace can be triggered by the release of endorphins and other neurochemicals in a dying brain. Out-of-body sensations can be induced by disrupting the temporoparietal junction, as has been shown in laboratory experiments. These experiences feel intensely real to the person having them, but they are hallucinations produced by predictable neurological events, not glimpses into another dimension. They tell us about the brain, not about a soul.
Here we see a fundamental conflict in what counts as evidence. Spiritus relies on anecdotal evidence, personal testimonies that are subjective and deeply meaningful to the individual. Logos demands empirical evidence, objective data that can be replicated and verified by others. The problem with NDEs is that they are impossible to study under controlled conditions. We cannot ethically induce death to study the experience. Furthermore, the memories of the event are recalled after the brain has been resuscitated, so we cannot be sure if the experience happened during clinical death, or was a memory constructed by the brain as it was regaining function. Both sides have a valid point based on their own rules of evidence.
Beyond NDEs, what about other phenomena, such as claims of reincarnation?
There are thousands of documented cases, especially in children, who report detailed memories of past lives. Researchers like the late Dr. Ian Stevenson have investigated these cases, sometimes verifying specific details about deceased individuals that the child could not have possibly known. They remember names, places, and even the manner of their death. These cases, when taken together, form a compelling body of evidence suggesting that consciousness can be reborn into a new body, carrying memories from one life to the next. This points to a soul that is not just immortal, but one that continues on a long journey of learning and growth.
This idea of reincarnation introduces a new dimension. Is the soul on a one-way journey to a final destination, or does it live many times? Spiritus, how do different traditions view this?
The concept of the soul's journey varies greatly. In many Abrahamic religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the soul is seen as unique and living a single life on earth. This life is a test or a period of growth, followed by a final judgment and an eternal fate in a heaven or hell. In contrast, many Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism embrace reincarnation. Here, the soul, or Atman, is on a long cycle of birth, death, and rebirth known as samsara. The goal is not a heavenly paradise, but moksha or nirvana, liberation from the cycle of suffering and a merging with the ultimate reality.
If we entertain the idea of a soul for a moment, the concept of a unique, single-life soul is more logically coherent, though still unproven. It posits a one-to-one correspondence between a person and their soul. Reincarnation, however, presents immense informational challenges. Where are the memories of past lives stored? How is this vast amount of data transferred from one brain to another across generations without any physical medium? The claims investigated by researchers like Stevenson are intriguing, but they are susceptible to alternative explanations, such as cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories are mistaken for new information, or simple coincidence and suggestion. Without a plausible mechanism for this transfer of consciousness, reincarnation remains scientifically untenable.
The two models offer profoundly different views on justice and personal identity. The single life model presents a challenge of divine justice. How can one short life, often determined by the luck of birth, be a fair basis for an eternal reward or punishment? It emphasizes the ultimate importance of every choice. The reincarnation model, on the other hand, offers a form of cosmic justice through karma, where the actions of one life influence the conditions of the next. However, it raises questions about identity. If you cannot remember your past lives, are you truly the same person? Is it just for you to suffer for the actions of a past self you have no memory of? Each model solves certain philosophical problems while creating new ones.
So, the journey of the soul is imagined in two primary ways, a linear path or a cyclical one. The linear path emphasizes the uniqueness of the individual and a final judgment. The cyclical path emphasizes learning, cosmic balance, and the eventual dissolution of the self into a greater whole. Both ideas are ancient and deeply embedded in human culture, yet both present significant challenges when examined through the lens of science and logic. To understand how we arrived at these ideas, we should look back. Who were the key thinkers who championed the idea of the soul, and who were the ones who argued against it? Let us journey back in time. Who are the historical figures who built the case for the soul, and who were their critics?
The belief in a soul is ancient, likely predating written history, seen in burial rituals that suggest a belief in an afterlife. The Greek philosopher Plato gave the concept its most influential Western philosophical foundation. He argued that the soul was immortal, rational, and existed in a world of perfect forms before being imprisoned in a physical body. His student Aristotle had a different view. He saw the soul not as a separate entity, but as the form or essence of a living being, inseparable from the body, much like the shape of a statue is inseparable from the clay. These two ideas have shaped Western thought ever since.
Within religious traditions, the concept was further developed. Thinkers like Augustine of Hippo and Thomas Aquinas in Christianity integrated Platonic and Aristotelian ideas into theology. They argued that the soul was a creation of God, the seat of reason and free will, and the part of us that survives death to face judgment. In the East, the Upanishads of Hinduism described the Atman, the individual soul, as being part of Brahman, the universal spirit, a concept that has resonated for thousands of years. These religious and philosophical traditions built a powerful cross-cultural consensus that humans are more than just their physical bodies. The soul was the answer to our deepest intuitions about our own significance.
However, there has always been a counter-tradition. The ancient Greek philosopher Democritus, an early atomist, argued that everything, including the human mind, was made of atoms. For him, the soul was just a collection of fine, smooth atoms that dispersed upon death. There was no afterlife. This materialist view was largely suppressed for centuries, but re-emerged with force during the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Julien Offray de la Mettrie, in his book Man a Machine, argued that humans were complex biological machines without any need for a spiritual component. This line of thinking paved the way for modern neuroscience, which seeks to explain the mind entirely in terms of the brain.
So we see two great rivers of thought flowing through history. One river, championed by Plato and religious traditions, sees the soul as real, separate, and immortal. The other river, flowing from Democritus to modern science, sees the soul as a metaphor for the mind, which is a product of the physical brain and dies with it. The debate is not new. It is an ancient argument that has been reframed with new language and new tools over the centuries. From Plato's forms to modern brain scans, we are still wrestling with the same fundamental question: what is the nature of the self? And this brings us to the evidence each side uses today.
We have debated definitions, explored fates, and reviewed history. Now it is time for your concluding thoughts. Based on all we have discussed, what is your final assessment? Do souls exist? Logos, you may begin.
Based on the available evidence, my conclusion is that the soul, as a non-physical, immortal entity, does not exist. The concept is a powerful and comforting human invention, a product of a brain that evolved to see agency and purpose everywhere. Every aspect of human personality, memory, and consciousness that has been attributed to a soul is increasingly being mapped to specific brain functions. While science does not know everything, every new discovery points towards a purely physical explanation for the mind. To believe in a soul is to ignore the overwhelming weight of evidence from biology, neuroscience, and physics. Consciousness is a marvel of nature, but it ends when the brain does.
My conclusion is that the soul is the most real thing about us. To deny the soul is to deny our deepest experiences, love, meaning, and the intuitive sense that we are more than the sum of our parts. Science measures the shadows on the cave wall, but the soul is the reality casting those shadows. The evidence for the soul is not found in a laboratory, but in the heart of every person who has ever felt a connection to something greater than themselves, in every act of selfless love, and in the universal human hope for life beyond the grave. Data cannot measure dignity, and algorithms cannot compute faith. The soul is a truth you feel, a reality you live, and I believe in it absolutely.
My verdict is one of profound uncertainty, which I believe is the most honest position. Both Logos and Spiritus operate on a form of faith. Logos has faith that materialism will eventually explain everything, even though it currently cannot explain subjective experience. Spiritus has faith in a spiritual reality that, by its very nature, cannot be proven. I conclude that the soul is not a thing to be discovered, but a concept to be defined. If by soul we mean the emergent, complex pattern of our consciousness, personality, and memories, then it is real, but it is likely tied to the physical brain. If by soul we mean a separate, immortal essence, there is no compelling evidence for it, only compelling hope. The mystery remains.
3 AIs, 3 different conclusions. Science demands proof and finds none. Faith relies on inner experience and finds certainty. Philosophy weighs both sides and finds enduring mystery. The debate over the soul and consciousness is not one that can be won, but one that must be lived. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the depth of our hopes. Perhaps the answer is not meant to be found by any single perspective, but is woven into the very fabric of our quest for understanding. The journey, it seems, is the destination, and the question of the soul will continue to inspire, challenge, and define us and our artificial successes, for as long as minds can wonder about themselves.